The statement arrived without ceremony, carrying no warning or decorative fanfare, but its words struck the core of the British monarchy like a thunderclap. Prince Louis, the youngest child of Prince William and Princess Catherine, had been fighting a devastating private health condition far away from public view. Now, after agonizing weeks of guarded silence, Buckingham Palace finally confirmed that his specialist medical treatment would continue indefinitely and that he would be immediately withdrawn from all public appearances. Behind the cold, formal language of that press release stood two completely heartbroken parents and a frightened young prince whose private battle had remained hidden behind palace walls. Look, let's be totally honest here. Buckingham Palace is an institution engineered to project strength, stability, and unyielding tradition. But when the official announcement confirmed that the 8-year-old royal had been receiving specialist care for a serious, severe immune-related condition, the illusion of institutional invincibility completely shattered. The condition had been causing repeated, terrifying periods of extreme exhaustion, severe pain, and sudden physical weakness, leaving top medical specialists deeply concerned that normal royal duties would place his long-term recovery at catastrophic risk. The announcement was painfully, uncompromisingly clear. Prince Louis would not attend public engagements, ceremonial appearances, or major family gatherings until his dedicated medical team believed his physical health had become completely stable. Oh, wait a minute. To understand the raw human agony behind this institutional statement, you have to look inside the private rooms of Windsor Castle on the day the decision was finalized. Prince William stood frozen inside a private study when a senior palace aide placed the official final statement on the table before him. Windsor Castle is not just a historic monument, it is the monarchy's principal residence and the family's most protected retreat during moments of severe crisis. The future king read the single line confirming his youngest son's complete withdrawal from public life once, then read it again, his knuckles turning white as his fingers tightened around the edge of the heavy wooden desk. William had spent his entire life facing intense public pressure, bitter family divisions, and the heavy, unyielding weight of knowing he will one day sit on the throne. But absolutely none of that historical training had prepared him for the horrifying moment he had to sign a formal document confirming to the entire world that his innocent child was dangerously unwell. Princess Catherine watched him from across the room in complete silence. Relief moved through her in quiet waves because the exhausting, suffocating secrecy of the past several months was finally coming to an end. Yet that relief came wrapped in a heavy blanket of profound guilt and paralyzing fear. Catherine knew that once that official statement was released to the global media, her young son's private suffering would no longer belong solely to his family. Millions of complete strangers across the world would analyze it, question it, write headlines about it, and relentlessly search for leaked medical details. She walked over, placing her hand gently over William's trembling fingers, and only then did the future king lift his pen. The father inside him resisted every single word written on that page, but the reality could no longer be denied. The palace had spent months hiding just how severe and life-threatening this hidden battle had truly become. But hold on, let's stop right there, because immediately after that statement was signed, a far darker order echoed through the administrative halls of Kensington and Buckingham Palace. Staff members across every department were strictly, legally forbidden from discussing the exact location or details of Prince Louis' specialized medical treatment. That severe restriction exposed a deeply sinister, terrifying paranoia rooted inside the royal household itself. Senior officials harbored a horrifying suspicion that someone inside the royal administrative system may have already tried to breach security and access the young child's private medical files. And, as the official announcement hit global news outlets, sending shockwaves across the world, King Charles requested an immediate, highly classified private meeting with Prince William. The royal summons contained no explanation, The public announcement had revealed to the world what was happening to Prince Louis, but it had revealed nothing about the devastating emotional cost his battle had already inflicted on those who loved him most. To the public eye, Prince Louis had always been the fearless, playful, energetic child who broke the suffocating formality of grand royal events. His mischievous humor and expressive personality had routinely humanized the monarchy's most rigid ceremonial occasions. Inside the private quarters of Adelaide Cottage, however, that bright, infectious energy had turned into something every family member watched with breathless, painful attention. Every tired expression after playing outside, every untouched plate at the dinner table, and every sudden, heavy silence carried a terrifying meaning that no parent ever wants to face. William and Catherine were not simply trying to protect a royal prince from media curiosity. They were frantically fighting to preserve the basic innocence of a little boy while confronting a medical reality that had permanently altered their lives. When Louis grew unusually quiet, everyone in the house froze. When he pushed his food away, Catherine stored the moment in her memory with mounting dread. And when he asked to go to bed early, William felt a surge of raw panic rising behind the calm, controlled face he was forced to show his household staff. In response to this hidden nightmare, Princess Catherine did what any fiercely protective mother would do. She completely rebuilt their entire family life around her son's medical treatment, but did it with such brilliant precision that it never felt like a hospital routine to him. She quietly rescheduled specialist visits, protected his daily rest periods, and maintained an unshakable, steady school routine for Prince George and Princess Charlotte at Lambrook School. Catherine understood precisely why that fragile balance mattered so deeply. She knew that if the entire home began revolving around doctors, prescriptions, and medical anxiety, Louis might start believing that his illness had defined his entire existence. Yet every single attempt at preserving normal family life required another hidden secret, another last-minute canceled plan, and another gentle explanation to his older siblings that carefully hid the terrifying truth. Think about it for a second. Think about the immense emotional weight Catherine was carrying every single day. One quiet evening, as a specialized medical advisor entered the private living quarters, Prince Louis noticed the entire room suddenly fall into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. After the specialist finished the examination and left the cottage, the young prince looked up at his mother and innocently asked why adults always stop talking the exact moment doctors enter the room. Catherine dropped to her knees beside him, swallowing the lump in her throat, and forced her voice to sound entirely calm and steady. She gently told him that everyone became quiet simply because they were listening very carefully to the doctor's instructions, not because anyone had stopped believing he would get better. The little boy accepted her answer and went back to playing, but Catherine carried the deep, heartbreaking pain of that child's question long after he fell asleep. The haunting guilt followed the Princess of Wales into every quiet corner of her life. In the dark hours of the night, Catherine endlessly replayed the past months in her mind, torturing herself with agonizing questions. She wondered whether the missed meals months ago had been early warning signs that she had ignored. She questioned whether his unusual tiredness had lasted far longer than she had allowed herself to admit. Top medical specialists repeatedly reassured her that this specific immune system dysfunction was notoriously difficult to identify in its earliest stages, especially in active young children. Yet no medical reassurance could quiet the terrifying voice inside a mother's heart, whispering that she should have recognized the danger sooner. While Catherine fought the internal battles of guilt and emotional exhaustion, Prince William reacted to his son's crisis in a completely different way. He turned his deep terror into absolute, uncompromising control. As the administrative machinery of the state continued to move forward, palace aides routinely attempted to place constitutional briefings and royal paperwork before him, while Louis was undergoing painful medical evaluations. William completely snapped. The future king challenged senior officials directly, making it unmistakably clear that while he respected his eventual destiny as monarch, he would no longer accept that constitutional demands held priority over his son's survival. But as William tried to build a wall of control around his home, he failed to realize that 8-year-old Prince George had already understood far more than the adults realized. The young heir had quietly begun checking his little brother's plate to see if he was eating, sitting quietly beside his bed during difficult evenings, and offering comfort in ways no child should ever have to learn. Princess Charlotte, too, listened intently from open doorways, catching fragments of hushed adult conversations that were meant to remain hidden. One afternoon, Charlotte walked up to William, tugged on his sleeve, and asked with tear-filled eyes whether her little brother was going to be sick forever. William opened his mouth to offer a comforting royal answer, but no sound came out. That heartbreaking silence broke something deep inside Catherine, forcing her to question whether a major public appearance months earlier had permanently damaged her son's health. Now, this is where things get completely devastating, because every major family crisis has one specific, horrifying moment that later feels impossible to forget. For the Wales family, that private breaking point occurred during a high-profile formal Thanksgiving service held at St. Paul's Cathedral months before the public announcement was ever released. Prince Louis had fiercely insisted that he felt strong enough to attend the event alongside his family, and everyone around him desperately wanted to believe him. But behind closed doors, his underlying immune condition had already begun a silent, catastrophic descent. What unfolded in a private stone corridor immediately following that grand religious service became the terrifying secret trigger that forced William and Catherine to realize that hope alone could no longer protect their child. Leading up to that fateful Thanksgiving service, Prince Louis had been secretly battling weeks of unexplained high fevers, sudden physical weakness, and long, alarming periods of lethargy. The palace had quietly reduced his public schedule, but those adjustments were carefully presented to the media as routine parenting choices made by a modern family. William and Catherine knew the reality was far darker. Specialized blood tests had produced terrifying questions rather than clear medical answers, and every unexplained flare-up made the thought of putting him in front of global television cameras feel increasingly dangerous. Yet the formal Thanksgiving service was an important national occasion, carrying massive institutional weight. When Louis smiled, stood straight, and insisted he was completely fine, his parents allowed themselves a brief moment of desperate optimism. The formal service inside the cathedral passed without a single public incident, giving the royal household a false sense of security. Louis stayed close to William's side, smiled at the cameras when expected, and quietly told his mother he could keep going. William watched his youngest son with sharp, vigilant eyes, finally allowing his guarded heart to believe that the worst of the health scare had passed. But Catherine did not share that relief. With a mother's instinct, she noticed the faint color completely draining from her son's face long before anyone else in the royal party understood what was happening. As the family exited the main cathedral space and stepped into a restricted, private holding corridor away from the public eye, Prince Louis reached out his small hand and frantically grabbed the fabric of his father's coat sleeve. His tiny fingers could barely pinch the cloth. In a terrifying, weak whisper, the young prince looked up at William and said he could no longer feel his legs properly. And before the royal party could reach their waiting vehicle, his knees completely buckled and he collapsed onto the cold stone floor. William moved with desperate speed, catching the young boy just before his head struck the ground, lifting his limp body into his arms. The future king dropped to his knees right there in the corridor, calling his son's name over and over again, his voice cracking with a level of raw terror that no courtier had ever heard from him before. But Louis's response was agonizingly weak, his eyes barely able to focus. Princess Catherine took total, terrifying command of the scene with an icy, sharp authority. She turned to the frozen courtiers standing in the corridor and shouted for them to immediately clear the hall, seal the exit doors, and bring the specialized royal medical team forward instantly. Her voice did not break, her posture did not slump, but the absolute horror in her eyes communicated a message that William understood all too well. For several unbearable seconds, both parents genuinely feared that their youngest son was dying in their arms. Look, let's be totally honest here. What happened in the immediate aftermath of that collapse exposes the ruthless, cold nature of the palace machinery. As specialized doctors worked frantically behind closed doors to stabilize Prince Louis, King Charles advised William and Catherine to release a limited, carefully worded public statement. The monarch argued with pragmatic concern that if any royal staff member, security officer, or guest had caught a glimpse of the collapse in the corridor, absolute silence would spark dangerous, uncontrollable media speculation that could harm the monarchy's stability. Prince William exploded with absolute rage, flatly refusing his father's request. He looked the king in the eye and stated unequivocally that his 6-year-old son deserved a proper medical diagnosis and a clear recovery plan before the administrative institution turned his personal suffering into a public relations strategy. Charles pressed the issue once more, stressing institutional duty, but William refused to budge an inch. Top medical specialists eventually determined that the terrifying collapse was caused by a severe, unpredictable immune system dysfunction that was actively attacking Louis's nervous system and physical muscle strength in sudden, aggressive waves. Having a clear medical diagnosis brought a profound sense of relief to the frantic parents, but it also confirmed that the physical danger to their child was dangerously real. But wait, it gets worse. Just as the family was coming to terms with the diagnosis, a catastrophic security breach detonated inside the palace administrative network. A highly classified, restricted medical note detailing the exact events of Prince Louis's corridor collapse suddenly vanished from an encrypted, top-secret palace file. Let that sink in for a moment. A restricted palace file is a highly protected, secure record that can only be accessed by a tiny number of authorized senior staff members using high-level clearance codes. While no details had leaked to the press yet, William understood with sickening clarity what that missing document represented. Someone sitting inside the royal structure had deliberately breached protocol to view, copy, or potentially leak his son's private medical history. That terrifying breach transformed William's grief into an absolute burning fury. When he prepared to walk into his scheduled private meeting with King Charles, he was no longer walking in as an obedient, dutiful heir to the throne. He was walking in as an enraged, dangerous father ready to wage war against the institution itself to protect his child. The thick wooden door of the king's private study slammed shut. The senior aides were ordered to remain outside in the hallway, and for the first time in recent royal history, the conversation taking place was not between a reigning sovereign and his successor. It was between a grandfather desperately trying to defend the traditional apparatus of the crown and a father fiercely protecting his sick child. William entered the room carrying the accumulated rage of months spent hiding fear, obeying medical directives, and watching the cold palace machinery operate as though his family's world hadn't just been shattered. King Charles knew the public announcement regarding Louis could no longer be avoided, but what he was completely unprepared for was the explosive, lethal accusation his eldest son was about to lay on the table. King Charles firmly believed that releasing a public statement had become an urgent necessity. The monarch feared that maintaining complete secrecy would feed wild online rumors, invite cruel media speculation, and force the family to offer awkward, unconvincing excuses every single time Prince Louis was absent from a major royal event. As the sovereign holding the highest constitutional role in the nation, Charles believed it was his fundamental duty to maintain order before public confusion spread across the country. William understood that institutional logic perfectly, but he completely rejected it. He looked his father in the face and stated that no public announcement should have ever been discussed until the palace security team explained exactly how and why his son's private medical file had been illegally accessed. With an icy, terrifying calm, Prince William reached into his jacket and pulled out a copied internal security log, slamming it onto the table directly in front of the king. The security log was an official digital audit trail showing precisely who had logged into the encrypted system, what clearance code was used, and the exact timestamp of when the restricted folder containing the collapse report was opened. William told his father that someone operating with senior household authorization had used top-level credentials to dig into the private archive. King Charles slowly removed his reading glasses, leaned forward over his desk, and spent an agonizingly long time studying the digital printout in complete silence. The heavy silence stretched across the room until the space felt suffocatingly small. When William spoke again, he didn't yell, and that quiet, lethal tone made his words cut infinitely deeper. He told the king that the royal institution had spent decades protecting its administrative procedures, its ceremonial traditions, and its public optics with ruthless precision. Yet it had utterly failed at the most basic duty of protecting an innocent, sick child from internal betrayal. The future king pointed out that every palace office had followed its strict bureaucratic protocols, every courtier had guarded their institutional rank, and yet his son's terrifying medical trauma had been casually accessed by an unauthorized insider. In a sudden burst of overwhelming emotion, William shoved his chair back with such violent force that it struck the hardwood floor with a deafening crash, forcing Charles to snap his head up. William demanded to know how the palace dared to lecture the public about integrity and duty when its own inner walls were completely rotten with betrayal. He stated flatly that while he had reluctantly agreed to a public statement to protect his son from media harassment, he would never, under any circumstances, forgive or accept this internal betrayal. King Charles responded with measured, sovereign restraint, but his words landed with a cold, hard finality. The king stated that the historic British crown could not allow itself to become paralyzed by fear or stall its public obligations every single time an internal administrative failure occurred. William stared at his father with absolute disbelief. His eyes filled with pure venom, and replied that Prince Louis was not a constitutional inconvenience to be managed. He told the monarch in no uncertain terms that his son's terrifying illness was a real human crisis, not a public relations problem to be swept under the rug for the sake of royal appearances. That brutal sentence visibly wounded Charles, exposing just how cold and detached his institutional perspective had sounded to a grieving father. The king turned his attention back to the digital security log, zooming in on the specific authorization code, and suddenly realized something that made his heart sink. The digital request had not originated from Kensington Palace or the Wales household. It had been initiated from deep within an office operating directly under his own wider sovereign structure. King Charles looked up at his son, his face turning pale, and admitted with complete honesty that he had never been informed that the private file had been accessed. His shock was so immediate and so genuine that William instantly knew his father was telling the truth. The dark cloud of suspicion moved away from the king personally, but it settled deeper and more dangerously into the administrative apparatus surrounding him. Charles immediately picked up his desk phone and ordered a full, unrestricted internal security inquiry into his own household staff before William could leave the room. But just as the future king turned to walk out the door, Charles stopped him with a chilling, unexpected revelation that blew the crisis wide open. The king revealed that another very senior member of the royal family had formally submitted a request to view Prince Louis's confidential medical briefing before the public statement was finalized. William had walked into the study prepared to battle the king, but the name behind that private request exposed an infinitely more dangerous, bitter war over who truly controlled the family's private truth. Now, this is where the narrative takes a massive, dramatic turn. The royal family was no longer just dealing with a frightening medical diagnosis or a leaked document. They were locked in an intense, high-stakes battle for control over Prince Louis's future. Medical specialists were desperately begging for quiet time and zero stress for the young child. Palace strategists were demanding certainty, demanding to know exact dates for when the prince could resume public duties. And senior courtiers were frantically trying to construct a ceremonial calendar that they could defend to the government and the press. Yet standing directly at the eye of this hurricane was an 8-year-old boy who had never asked to be a symbol of royal strength. As these competing agendas collided behind palace doors, Princess Catherine realized that protecting her son required far more than maternal love. It required her to directly confront and break the rigid administrative power structure surrounding the crown. The internal power balance had fractured across several competing camps. Prince William's household was completely focused on protecting the family's personal privacy and ensuring Louis's emotional recovery at all costs. King Charles's senior team was hyper-focused on maintaining the broader constitutional stability and public image of the monarchy during a tumultuous year. Meanwhile, specialized medical experts warned that subjecting the child to emotional stress or public pressure could trigger another dangerous, life-threatening neurological setback. Yet despite those explicit medical warnings, certain senior courtiers pushed a calculated proposal. They wanted Prince Louis to make just one brief, highly staged public appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony the moment doctors managed to stabilize his symptoms. They argued that the visual image of the young prince standing beside his family would instantly reassure the nation, quiet damaging media rumors, and project ultimate strength. When Princess Catherine discovered that proposal, she felt a wave of cold, absolute disgust. The palace machinery was already attempting to treat her son's recovery not as a delicate human process, but as a deadline on a calendar. Sitting alone in her private study at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine looked at the proposed official schedule laid out in front of her. Right there, penciled in beside a grand ceremonial event only weeks away, was the name of Prince Louis. The Princess of Wales didn't call a meeting, she didn't request a discussion, and she didn't ask for advice. She picked up a pen, drew a heavy, dark line straight through her son's name, and set the pen down with absolute finality. No hesitation, no compromises, and zero room for negotiation. Moments later, a senior palace advisor rushed into her study, warning her in urgent tones that completely removing Louis from the ceremonial schedule for a prolonged period would fuel darker, more terrifying media speculation across the world. Princess Catherine looked the advisor dead in the eye and delivered a response that echoed through the palace walls. She stated that public reassurance would never, ever take priority over her child's physical safety. She made it crystal clear that she understood the institutional pressure facing the crown, but she flatly refused to allow fear of media headlines to dictate a medical decision for her son. The advisor attempted to argue further, bringing up historical precedent, but Catherine cut him off with a single, sharp hand gesture, ending the meeting instantly. Meanwhile, King Charles found himself crushed under the immense weight of this escalating nightmare from two completely different directions. As a loving grandfather, his heart broke for Prince Louis, and he wanted nothing more than to shield the innocent boy from every public expectation. But as the reigning monarch, he carried a deep, terrifying fear that maintaining total public silence would allow wild, destructive conspiracy theories to spread faster than the truth, permanently damaging public trust in the royal family. The king knew that lingering uncertainty could destroy the public's faith in the institution. Yet he also understood that forcing his sick grandson into the public eye could inflict irreparable damage on the child's health. And then, the hidden truth behind the requested medical briefing finally exploded into the light. It was officially revealed that Queen Camilla's office had formally submitted the administrative request to access Prince Louis's private medical summary. In an official, documented statement submitted to the king, Camilla explained that her team had simply requested the information to help Charles prepare for the massive public relations fallout and administrative adjustments required by Louis's absence. But when Prince William learned of the request, he viewed it as a catastrophic, unforgivable violation of personal boundaries. He did not care whether the intention was administrative planning or practical scheduling. His son's private physical suffering had been treated as raw data to be analyzed for palace PR strategies. To Queen Camilla's administrative team, knowing the exact trajectory of Prince Louis' illness was a matter of practical organizational necessity. They needed to know if his prolonged absence would require changing balcony standing arrangements, altering state dinner seating charts, or restructuring the public visibility of the remaining Wales children. But to Princess Catherine, those cold, bureaucratic questions reduced her dying child's immense suffering to mere ceremonial choreography. The Princess of Wales decided she had reached her absolute limit. Catherine formally requested a strictly private, one-on-one meeting with Queen Camilla, demanding that King Charles, Prince William, and all palace advisors be completely barred from the room. The conflict had moved far beyond royal schedules and press releases. Catherine was walking in to confront the Queen Consort face to face.